us about the sweater. Tell us about the sweater. No candle today.
No, this is just
J. Cal, if you're concerned about the rise of authoritarianism, which actually this was one of my big trends in the prediction episodes.
I am concerned. Democracy
which was the most negative trend. But then I think you should be concerned about this like rising tide we have here of censorship and the surveillance
100%
state.
I care about it. Yes. I'm in agreement.
And our federal law enforcement agencies demanding more and more powers.
And lockdowns.
I'm in agreement on those. I'm in agreement on those.
Instead of blowing this whole like January 6th thing out of proportion, you should be concerned about their attempts to exploit and use that to demand more powers to surveil and prosecute American citizens.
I do not believe in surveillance. I think
but you should understand that the hysteria created around that event is going to be used. It's going to be exploited
possibly
to demand these powers.
Politicians are exploiting this on all sides of the aisle. I agree with you. The right and the left. The right is diminishing it. The left is exacerbating it. The truth in the middle is, I think we are in agreement, Sacks. The overwhelming majority of people who went to the Capitol that day were dipshits who just wanted to protest and they cared about Trump and they went there for the party of it all. And then there was a small cohort who intended harm and who are deranged and who could potentially be dangerous in the way Chamath framed it. Lone wolves or small packs of wolves like the Oklahoma City bombers who murdered a large number of people. And so we have to be very careful in prosecuting one group one way and one the other way. And that's exactly what the Department of Justice has done in that case. 700 people got pled deals or very minor sentences. And then these folks are going to have the book thrown at them, and rightfully so, because they could have murdered Pence or they could have murdered Pelosi, just like that woman got murdered. I'm sorry, the woman tragically got stopped and shot and died. Like that could have been a much different day. If dozens of people had died and those cops had not shown restraint, we could be sitting here having a much different discussion about the Oath Keepers. If the Oath Keepers had done what the Oklahoma City bombers succeeded in doing, this would be a much different discussion.
Right. They didn't, which is why it is a different discussion.
Well, thank God for our police and for how brave they were in not unloading their pistols when any reasonable person who was being beaten by that crowd and crushed would have taken their gun out and started firing. They didn't. Thank God those police did not start firing.
Look, I think the one thing we can agree on is we don't want something like that to happen again. And there's two simple things that would prevent it. One is reform of the Electoral Count Act, like we talked about. That's what Biden should be going for, not making these speeches about Bull Connor and George Wallace. He could actually get that done. And the other thing is, if the Capitol Police had just been a little bit more prepared and had barricades and screens of better security, that also couldn't happen again. That's all we have to do to solve that problem of January 6th.
The third thing we have to do is arrest these Oath Keepers and put them in jail for what they did.
That's happened.
Well, they've been indicted. You tell me if they're going to go to jail.
They'll convict them of something.
Yeah, well, and rightfully so, it seems. Hopefully they get their day in court.
Maybe we can transition. I want to talk about the other side of the coin on inflation, because I think that we have hammered the point for a long time now that the government was really
slow,
sort of like off-piste by printing
incompetent
trillions and trillions of dollars and injecting it into the economy. And what it's really created has been this massive bout of inflation, which then could cause an ultimate recession because the Fed has to react. All of those things I think are well documented. I just wanted to put on the record a little element of the counterfactual, which I think is really important. And this is an article in the Wall Street Journal, and Nick, you can post this if you can, please. But I'm just going to read this, so I'm just going to look down. The first two rounds of stimulus payments lifted 11.7 million people in America out of poverty, according to the Census Bureau. Americans built up $2.7 trillion in extra savings, and some expect that, combined with rising wages, to provide them with lasting stability despite the return to more normal spending patterns and rising inflation. So I just want to make sure that all of us have heard that, because that's an incredible thing to be able to say that 11.7 million Americans in poverty are no longer in poverty because of the stimulus, which I think when you look at the right way of framing what some of these progressives want to do, I think a lot of the good intentions comes from things like this. And I just think it's important to acknowledge that that did happen. And that's something that we should really be proud of. And especially if those folks can actually stay in the lower middle and then move up to the middle class, that's an incredible outcome. And, we all supported that, I think, genuinely. And I think that that's good.
We knew it was scary and we needed to put something into the economy to keep it from crashing. And it's very hard to know what the right amount was, right, Chamath? Like, how do you know what the right amount of stimulus is in a pandemic that happens every 100 years? And thank God it feels like Omicron is leading us out of this. Okay.
Yeah, there's some great examples, by the way, in this article. If people want to take the time to read it, of some examples of people that have really done an incredible job in like completely changing their financial picture, which I think.
Well, I mean,
amazing.
a lot of people went into freelance. A lot of these young people realized. I don't know if you saw this headline: 1 million less people started college this year and enrolled. And I think what's happening is so many people who were going into college realized, I don't know if I should go into debt. I figured out a way to make money at home. I'm more financially literate. I'm going to make a better decision about college and not go 100K into debt.
Well, to be very specific,
made people very resilient, and they're making better judgments about their own lives because they've been forced to.
To be specific, I think you mean boys, because the other thing that's happening is in colleges now, it's becoming very tilted female versus male.
Especially graduate degrees.
In some colleges, it's 2/3 female, 1/3 male. So
65-70%.
we are actually creating this weird longitudinal pattern here where an entire gender is going to be very miseducated relative to another one. And in fact, it'll be the exact opposite of what it was like in probably the 50s or 60s, where you had these large swaths of men that are educated, women who typically stayed home or were undereducated relative to their ability. Here now, it's the exact opposite, where women are getting undergrads and graduate degrees, and boys are learning how to play video games and smoke pot.
Incels, a very strange time. I mean, that's what happens when you do.
Davids, what is that like?
Yeah, being an incel. Tell us, you were a pioneer in being an incel.
We made it through the show, so it was so civil.
Let's get the Friedberg ratio up.
Let's talk about an exciting scientific paper and the implications of it.
Let's go to science, boy.